No one believed Marcus Hale when he said the ruined ranch was the only thing he had left. At 55, the injured former Navy SEAL had come home with a cane, a damaged name, and court papers that kept him away from his own children. Then Nova, the retired military dog everyone called broken, froze inside the old horse barn and began clawing at the floorboards beneath the sealed fourth stall. Under the rotting wood, Marcus found a mud-stained cassette tape tied to an erased sheriff's report from the year his uncle died. By sunrise, the same men who had buried that report began circling Ravenwood again. Before the ranch could be taken from him, Nova would lead Marcus to a recording that could destroy a 15-year lie or cost him the last family he had left. If you were in Marcus's place, would you follow the truth or walk away? Tell us where you're watching from tonight. Marcus Hale did not come home to applause. He came home to the dry metallic sound of a cane striking the polished floor of a military hospital, one careful step at a time, while rain crawled down the windows like the world outside had no idea what had been taken from him. At 55, Marcus still carried the shape of discipline. He stood 6'1", broad-shouldered, solid in the way of a man who had spent his life under weight and weather, but no longer with the hard bulk of a young operator. His body looked controlled now, like a former Navy SEAL who still trained every morning because stopping would feel too much like surrender. His face was clean-shaven, angular, and unmistakably American in its masculine sharpness, with a strong chin, a straight nose, and deep-set eyes that seemed older than the rest of him. His hair, cut in a neat undercut, was dark at the roots and silvering at the sides, always clean, always controlled. Even in the hospital, he wore order like armor. The long-sleeve blue camouflage uniform fit close enough to show the width of his chest and shoulders without looking careless. The sleeves were buttoned, the collar sat straight. His dark boots were polished enough to suggest habit, not vanity. Only the limp betrayed him. The wound in his leg had ended his last mission before the paperwork did. Doctors used careful language around him: permanent mobility limitation, nerve damage, functional adaptation. Marcus heard only one thing beneath it all: you will not be what you were. Once he had been a Marine sniper attached to special operations teams, a man trained to lie still for hours, control his breathing, control fear, control movement, control the moment between life and death. Now he had to think before stepping off a curb. He had to pause before stairs. He had to accept help from nurses young enough to be his children. But the leg was not what broke him. The envelope did. It arrived on a Tuesday morning while the smell of antiseptic still clung to his skin. A legal envelope, cream-colored, clean, almost polite. Marcus opened it with the same steady hands that had assembled rifles in darkness. Inside were divorce papers. Diane had filed while he was still recovering. Diane Hale was 48, elegant in a way that had always made strangers trust her too quickly. She was the kind of woman who understood how to enter a room softly and still control it. Her blonde-brown hair rested neatly at her shoulders, always brushed smooth. Her face was refined, her skin fair, her eyes light and carefully wounded when she wanted sympathy. In court documents, she became more than a wife leaving a damaged husband. She became a mother protecting her children. Marcus read the first pages without breathing properly. Diane had requested primary custody, supervised visitation, emergency restrictions. Then he found the words she had chosen to build her case: psychological instability, combat-related trauma, potential for violent episodes, documented PTSD symptoms. The medical files meant to help him heal had been turned into evidence that he was unsafe. For a while, Marcus did not move. Rain tapped against the hospital glass. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed softly at something someone said. Life continued with cruel ease. He thought of his two children. Their faces appeared in his mind not as photographs, but as small moments. His son falling asleep against his shoulder during a movie. His daughter leaving a sticky note inside his sea bag before deployment. "Come home, Dad." He had come home, but apparently not as their father. A lawyer later explained the situation with professional caution. Diane had not taken away his rights forever, Not yet. The court had issued temporary restrictions pending evaluation. The words were meant to sound reasonable. Marcus understood what they meant in the real world. He could not pick his children up from school. He could not take them fishing. He could not stand in their bedroom doorway and say goodnight. He could see them only under conditions chosen by people who knew him through reports. What hurt most was not Diane's cruelty. It was the small, terrible fear that maybe she had found something true. There had been one night during a short leave home, months before the final mission. Marcus had woken from a nightmare so violently that he did not know where he was. His body had moved before his mind returned. Diane had been beside him, trying to wake him, and his hand had closed around her wrist. Only for a second. The instant he saw her face, he let go. He had not struck her. He had not threatened her. He had spent the next hour sitting on the bathroom floor, shaking silently, ashamed of his own reflexes. Diane had said she understood. She had touched his shoulder and told him he was home. Now that same moment sat inside a court filing, reshaped into proof. Marcus stared at the page until the words blurred. What if they were right? What if the war had followed him home more completely than he knew? What if loving his children meant staying far enough away not to hurt them? The thought entered him quietly and did more damage than any bullet ever had. Nova was waiting when Marcus left the hospital. The Belgian Malinois sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's old truck, as if he had been carved from attention itself. Nova was 7 years old, lean and powerful, with a yellow-brown coat darkening along the back and a black mask covering his muzzle and eyes. His ears stood sharp and high, catching every sound. His eyes were deep brown, intelligent, restless, and loyal in a way that made Marcus feel both grateful and undeserving. Around his neck was a worn, dark brown leather collar with a small metal tag engraved with one word, Nova. Nova had once been military canine, fast, disciplined, and almost unnervingly precise. But he too had been retired under a shadow. The report called it an overreaction. During Marcus's final deployment, Nova had lunged at a man the file described as presenting no clear threat. The man had not carried a weapon. He had not moved aggressively. But Nova had smelled something Marcus later learned to recognize, an animal sedative, sharp and chemical beneath sweat and dust. No one listened, not to the dog, not to Marcus. One page in a file was enough to make Nova dangerous. One diagnosis was enough to make Marcus unstable. They had both been dismissed by clean sentences written by people who never saw what they saw. Marcus opened the truck door. Nova leaned forward, nose brushing Marcus's sleeve, then lowered his head with a small, almost careful whine. "Yeah," Marcus murmured, easing himself behind the wheel. "I know, buddy." Nova did not wag his tail. He simply watched him. That was how Nova loved. Not loudly, not softly, completely. With no house left to return to, no free access to his children, and no marriage waiting on the other side of the hospital doors, Marcus drove north toward the only place the law had not taken from him, Ravenwood Ranch. The property had belonged to his uncle, Elias Hale, once the county sheriff and the only man from Marcus's childhood who had ever seemed interested in truth more than obedience. Elias had died 15 years earlier in what the official file called suicide. Marcus had not been there. Worse, Marcus had spent years telling himself he had no reason to be. As a boy, he had hated Ravenwood, not because of the horses or the cold mornings or the smell of hay and rain-soaked wood. He had hated it because of Ray Barlow, his stepfather. Ray had been a hard, broad man with workers' hands, a heavy jaw, and eyes that could make a room go quiet without raising his voice. He wore old construction jackets, smelled of tobacco and engine grease, and believed boys became men by being broken in the right places. Ray had always called Elias weak, paranoid, a disgrace to the family. At 15, Marcus had believed him. He remembered standing in the old stable during a storm, angry and scared, and calling Elias a coward. He remembered the hurt on his uncle's face. He remembered Ray's hand gripping his shoulder afterward, steering him away like Marcus had done something brave. That was the last real conversation he ever had with Elias. Years later, the guilt had become so old, it no longer burned. It lived deeper than that, like a stone carried inside the ribs. By the time Marcus reached Ravenwood, evening had fallen. The ranch appeared through a curtain of cold rain, dark and sagging at the edge of the trees. The main house leaned under its own age. The porch boards had warped. The fences were broken in long sections, disappearing beneath weeds and dead grass. Beyond the house, the horse barn stood like black shapes against the winter sky. No porch light waited for him. No voice called from inside. Marcus parked near the house and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Nova stood in the passenger seat, ears forward. "This is it," Marcus said. The dog did not look at the house. He looked past it, toward the barns. Marcus opened the door, pain flaring through his leg as he stepped down. He breathed through it, reached for his cane, then walked around the truck to let Nova out. The dog dropped lightly to the mud, nose working immediately. At first, Marcus thought Nova was simply mapping the property. A new place, new scents, old wood, mice, rain, rust. Then Nova stopped. He stood facing the fourth stall of the old horse barn. Unlike the others, that section had a heavy iron door across it, welded shut at the edges. The metal was red with rust, but the seams still held. Someone had not locked it to keep animals in. Someone had sealed it to keep people out. Nova's body changed, his head lowered, his shoulders tightened. A low growl rolled through his chest. Not wild, not panicked, but controlled and deep. Marcus frowned. Easy. Nova did not move. The dog lifted one paw and scraped it against the metal door. Once, twice, 3 times. Then he stopped and listened. Marcus felt the rain sliding beneath his collar. The ranch was silent except for wind and the ticking of water through broken gutters. "Nothing's in there," he said. Nova turned his head slightly and looked at him. It was not fear in the dog's eyes. It was recognition. Marcus pulled gently on the leash. "Come on, house first." Nova resisted for 1 second longer, then obeyed. But all the way to the porch, he kept looking back. Inside, Ravenwood smelled of dust, damp wood, and time. Marcus found an old couch under a sheet and a fireplace that needed cleaning before it could be trusted. He ate nothing. Nova refused his food. Outside, rain turned to sleet against the windows. Marcus lay awake for hours, listening to the house settle. He thought of his children. He thought of Diane's court statement. He thought of Elias and the word coward leaving his own mouth at 15. Sleep came at last in broken pieces. At 2:17 a.m., Marcus woke to the sound of metal being scratched. His eyes opened in the dark. For several seconds he did not move, caught between dream and room, between hospital and ranch, between the man he had been and the man everyone said he had become. Then he saw the empty space near the door. Nova was gone. Marcus grabbed his cane and forced himself up. The cold hit him as soon as he opened the front door. Sleet needled his face. The yard was silver black under the moonless sky. The sound came again. Scrape, scrape, scrape. A pause. Then 3 more. Marcus followed it to the horse barn, each step sending pain up his damaged leg. Nova stood before the sealed fourth stall, one paw raised, ears rigid, breathing fast but controlled. Nova. The dog did not turn. Marcus reached for the leather collar. The moment his fingers touched it, something inside the sealed stall answered. A tiny metallic click. So soft, Marcus almost convinced himself he had imagined it. Nova froze. Marcus froze with him. The iron door had been welded shut for 15 years. There was no light inside, no gap wide enough for a person, no fresh tracks in the mud except his and Nova's. Yet from somewhere beyond that rusted metal, something old had moved in the dark. Marcus tightened his hand around Nova's collar and felt the dog trembling, not with fear, but with the terrible certainty of a soldier who had heard a signal no one else was meant to hear. He whispered, "What did you find?" The barn gave no answer, but at 2:17 in the morning, behind a door sealed since the year Elias Hale died, something had answered Nova. By morning, Marcus had convinced himself there were reasonable explanations. Old farms made sounds, metal shrank in the cold, wind moved through cracks, mice nested where men stopped living. Ravenwood had stood empty too long, and empty places had a way of speaking in small, unsettling noises. That was what he told himself while standing at the kitchen sink, watching brown water cough from the faucet before running clear. Nova sat near the back door facing the barns. The Malinois had not slept much. His yellow-black coat looked darker in the gray morning light, the black mask around his eyes making his stare seem sharper, almost accusing. Every few seconds his ears twitched toward the fourth stall, though the house walls stood between him and the old horse barn. Marcus poured dry food into Nova's bowl. The dog did not move. "Eat," Marcus said quietly. Nova looked at the bowl, then back toward the door. Marcus felt a pulse of irritation, not at the dog but at himself for needing normal things to behave normally. Food in a bowl, a roof overhead, a dog sleeping near the fire, a man waking in a place that belonged to him and feeling, if not peace, then at least ownership. Ravenwood refused to give him even that. He spent the day making the house livable. He cleared dust from the downstairs bedroom because the stairs were too hard on his leg. He dragged old furniture away from the walls, checked the fireplace, and found a crate of canned food left behind by some previous caretaker with better intentions than follow-through. Every task took longer than it should have. His injured leg burned by noon. Twice he had to stop and press one hand against the wall until the pain settled from sharp to bearable. He hated those pauses. They made him feel watched, even when no one was there. By late afternoon, sleet had turned to a thin, cold rain. Marcus stood in the main hallway, looking at the framed photographs still hanging crooked along the wall. Most were faded landscapes or horse show pictures from decades ago. At the end of the hallway, half hidden behind a warped door, was Elias's old office. Marcus had avoided it since arriving. He told himself it was because the room would be dusty. The truth was simpler. He did not want to stand among the belongings of a man he had once refused to believe. The office smelled of dry paper, old leather, and something faintly metallic. A roll-top desk sat beneath the window. On the wall hung a tarnished sheriff's badge in a cracked wooden frame. Elias Hale stared out from a photograph beside it, younger than Marcus remembered, with tired eyes and a solemn mouth. Marcus looked away first. He searched the drawers without expecting much. Tax records, receipts, horse registration papers, an old pocket knife. Then, in the bottom drawer, he found a small lockbox. The lock had rusted, but not enough to resist a screwdriver. Inside lay a calendar from 15 years earlier. Marcus opened it carefully. Most pages were ordinary. Feed deliveries, county meetings, a note to call Ruth about Raven's shoulder. Names Marcus did not recognize. Then he reached the month Elias died. The date was circled in red, not angrily, precisely. Beside it, in Elias's tight handwriting, were 4 words and a time. 2:17, he heard it first. Marcus stared at the line until the room seemed to quiet around him. He did not say Nova's name because that made no sense. Nova had not belonged to Elias. Nova had not even been part of Marcus's life back then. But the note did something worse than confuse him. It suggested last night had not been the first time a dog had heard something at Ravenwood before a man did. Marcus closed the calendar. A small photograph slipped from between the pages and landed face down on the desk. For a moment, he did not touch it. Then he turned it over. The picture showed Elias standing beside a lean, working dog in front of the old barn. The dog was not Nova. It was darker, older, with a long muzzle and watchful eyes. One ear stood straighter than the other, and there was a white scar crossing the left side of its chest. Elias had one hand resting on the dog's head, not posing, just touching him as if the contact helped him stay upright. On the back, Elias had written one word, Raven. Marcus sat down slowly. The name opened no memory in him, but it stirred something close to one. A shape behind rain, a dog's cry in the dark. Ray Barlow's voice telling him not to look back. Nova whined from the hallway. Marcus looked up. The Malinois stood just outside the office door, rigid, eyes fixed on the photograph in Marcus's hand. He had not made a sound when Marcus entered the office. He had not followed him through the drawers. But now he stared at the image of Elias's dog with such still attention that Marcus felt cold move across his shoulders. "Easy," Marcus said. Nova took one step forward, lowered his nose, and sniffed the air near the photograph without touching it. Then he backed away, not frightened, respectful. It was the kind of movement soldiers made around graves. Marcus did not sleep much that night. He told himself he was waiting to see whether Nova would repeat the behavior, but deep down he already knew. At 2:17 in the morning, the dog rose from the rug without command, crossed the room, and went to the back door. Marcus followed at a distance. This time, he did not call him back. Nova crossed the yard through the rain-soft mud and stopped before the sealed stall. He did not bark. He did not throw himself at the door. He lifted one paw and scratched 3 times. Then he waited, ears angled forward, as if listening for something too small for human ears. Marcus stood under the barn roof, breathing carefully against the pain in his leg. There was no answer that he could hear, but Nova's body changed as though something had passed through the dark. The next morning, Marcus drove into town. The town of Ashford sat 8 miles from Ravenwood, tucked between pine ridges and low fields gone brown with winter. It had one grocery store, one diner, a courthouse annex, 2 churches, and the kind of main street that looked welcoming from a distance, but measured strangers carefully once they stepped inside. Marcus had not been there in years. People still looked at him like they remembered his last name before they remembered his face. At the hardware store, the clerk stopped talking to another customer when Marcus placed a box of screws and a pry bar on the counter. The man was thin, with a gray mustache and wireframe glasses, wearing a red vest with his name stitched over the pocket, Frank. Frank looked at the pry bar, then at Marcus's cane. "Working on Ravenwood?" he asked. "Trying to." Frank's fingers paused over the register. "Place has a way of making a man regret repairs." Marcus kept his voice even. "It's a house. Houses need work." Frank gave a short smile that did not reach his eyes. "Some houses need leaving alone." Before Marcus could answer, the bell above the door opened behind him. A young deputy stepped inside, rain shining on the shoulders of his brown uniform jacket. He was no more than 26, with a square face, close-cropped blonde hair, and the eager stiffness of a man still learning how authority should fit. His nameplate read, Deputy Harkin. The deputy looked from Marcus to the pry bar. "Mr. Hale," he said as if they had been expecting each other. Marcus turned. "Deputy." Harkin's eyes dropped briefly to the cane, then returned to Marcus's face. "Town's been quiet. Folks would like it to stay that way." Marcus felt the old familiar stillness settle over him, the one he used when someone tried to provoke movement from him. Quiet about what? The deputy glanced at Frank. Frank suddenly found the receipt printer interesting. Harkin adjusted his belt. "Old matters, family matters. People around here moved on." Marcus picked up his bag. "Doesn't look like they moved very far." The deputy's jaw tightened, but he said nothing else. Outside, Marcus sat in the truck for nearly a minute before starting the engine. Nova watched him from the passenger seat, ears low now, not afraid but attentive to the shift in Marcus's breathing. Marcus looked at the dog. What did Elias know that still scares them? Nova blinked once. That afternoon, Marcus drove to the small veterinary clinic at the far end of town. A faded sign above the door read, Callahan Animal Care. The building looked as though it had survived every winter by stubbornness alone. Inside, it smelled of disinfectant, old wood, and wet fur. A sleepy, orange cat watched from the reception counter, unimpressed by both man and dog. Dr. Ruth Callahan came out from the back with a clipboard in one hand and reading glasses perched low on her nose. She was 68, small but not fragile, with short, silver hair cut close around her face and hands roughened by decades of calming frightened animals. Her green eyes were sharp behind the glasses, the kind of eyes that noticed limps, tight jaws, and dogs that carried too much history in their bodies. She wore a faded moss-green veterinary coat over a gray turtleneck, brown work pants, and low boots scuffed at the toes. She looked at Nova first, not at Marcus's cane, not at his scars, not at the blue camouflage sleeves buttoned neatly at his wrists. At Nova. "Well," she said softly, "you're not the problem, are you?" Nova stood still, allowing her to approach. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. Most people saw Nova's alert posture and thought, danger. Ruth saw control. She crouched slowly, letting the dog smell the back of her hand. Nova leaned forward, sniffed once, then allowed her fingers beneath his collar. "Malinois," Ruth murmured. 7, maybe 8. Working dog. Not a pet pretending to be one. 7, Marcus said. "Retired?" "Removed." Ruth's eyes flicked up. "There's a difference." Marcus did not answer. She examined Nova with practiced care, checking his teeth, joints, pupils, scars, and reactions. Nova tolerated it with disciplined patience, though his ears turned toward every sound beyond the clinic walls. "He's wound tight," Ruth said, "but not unstable." "That's not what his file says." "Files don't sit with dogs at 2 in the morning." She straightened slowly. "People write what protects them." The words landed too close to several wounds at once. Marcus hesitated, then took the old photograph from inside his jacket and placed it on the exam table. Ruth's expression changed before she touched it. For the first time since he had met her, the old veterinarian looked her age. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Elias's office." Ruth removed her glasses and stared at the dog in the photo. "Raven," she whispered. Nova stepped closer to the table. Ruth noticed. Her mouth tightened. Marcus said, "You knew him." "I treated him." Ruth ran one thumb along the edge of the photograph. "Elias brought him in after a fence wire tore his shoulder. Said the dog had saved him from stepping into a bad place." "What bad place?" Ruth did not answer right away. Rain clicked against the clinic window. Outside, a dark sedan rolled slowly past, its windows tinted, its tires hissing on the wet street. Ruth's eyes followed it. When the car disappeared, she spoke in a lower voice. "Raven used to scratch at the 4th stall." Marcus felt his pulse shift. "Why?" "Not because he was afraid," Ruth looked at Nova. "Because he knew someone was lying." The sentence hung between them like breath in cold air. Marcus leaned forward. "Who?" Ruth's face closed slightly. Not from distrust of Marcus, but from a fear so old it had learned to look like caution. "Marcus, some people in this town don't bury the truth. They lock it up and call it peace." Before Marcus could press her, Nova made a sound. Not a bark, a low, broken whine. The Malinois was staring at the photograph again. His nose hovered inches above Raven's image, and then, very gently, he lowered his head until his muzzle touched the corner of the picture. Ruth went still. Marcus watched the dog, and for one strange second the clinic seemed to shrink around them. The old photograph, the living dog, the woman who remembered too much, the man who had forgotten too much. Nova closed his eyes, only for a moment, but it looked so much like recognition that Marcus felt grief rise in him for an animal he had never known. Ruth whispered almost to herself, "Dogs don't forgive lies. They wait them out." The rehook settled quietly into Marcus's bones. If Raven had waited at that stall years ago, and Nova was waiting there now, then maybe Ravenwood had not been silent for 15 years. Maybe no one had wanted to listen. That evening, after returning to the ranch, Marcus found Nova at the base of the sealed stall again. But this time the dog was not scratching the door. He was digging. Mud and old straw sprayed from beneath his front paws. Marcus limped toward him, rain spotting his sleeves. "Nova, leave it." The dog ignored the command. Marcus rarely had to repeat himself with Nova. That alone made him stop. Nova dug beneath the lower edge of the iron door, where the ground had softened from rain. After a minute, his teeth caught something. He pulled backward, muscles tightening along his shoulders, and dragged a small, blackened strip of leather from the mud. Marcus crouched with difficulty. It was part of an old collar. The leather was rotten, split at the edges, but a piece of metal still clung to it. Marcus wiped mud away with his thumb. 3 letters appeared beneath the grime. R-A-V. Inside the cracked fold of leather was a dark stain that had long ago become part of the material. Marcus did not want to think the word blood. He thought it anyway. The next morning, he returned to Ruth's clinic with a collar wrapped in an old towel. The bell above the door gave a tired ring as he entered. Ruth looked up from the counter, saw his face, and said nothing. Marcus placed the towel down and unfolded it. The color left her cheeks. She reached for the counter as though the floor had shifted beneath her. "Raven," she said. Nova stood beside Marcus, perfectly still. Ruth's hand hovered over the collar, but did not touch it. "I told Elias to take him away from that barn. I told him whatever he thought he was finding, it was going to get both of them hurt." Marcus asked, "What did Raven find?" Ruth swallowed. For a moment, it seemed she would finally say it. Then the clinic door opened. The bell sounded too loud. A large man in a dark brown sheriff's jacket stepped inside, removing his hat with slow, deliberate calm. Sheriff Cole Ramsey was 58, broad through the chest and heavier at the waist, with close-cut gray hair and a clean-shaven face flushed by cold and years of hard living. His eyes were pale, tired, and watchful. He carried himself like a man who had worn authority so long he no longer questioned whether he deserved it. His gaze moved from Marcus to Nova, then to the towel on the counter. The old collar lay exposed between them. Sheriff Ramsey smiled without warmth. "Looks like you're digging up things best left to rot, Mr. Hale." Ruth said nothing. Marcus placed one hand lightly on Nova's collar. The dog did not growl. He did not move, but his ears rose, and his eyes fixed on the sheriff, as if some part of him had just recognized a scent the room had been trying to hide. For 3 more days, Marcus did not open the fourth stall. That was what troubled him most. He had faced locked doors before, steel ones, foreign ones, doors behind which men waited with guns, doors that hid wounded teammates, doors he had been ordered to breach without hesitation. But this door was different. It was not danger on the other side that held him back. It was memory. Each morning he told himself he would cut the welds before sunset. Each afternoon his leg ached, the sky darkened, and some other repair suddenly seemed more urgent. A leaking pipe beneath the kitchen sink, a loose board on the porch, a broken latch on the bedroom window. Ravenwood had enough damage to keep a man busy forever, and Marcus began to understand how easily work could become cowardice if a person held it tightly enough. Nova knew. The Malinois never forced him toward the barn in daylight. He did not bark at the house or pace in circles. He stayed near Marcus while he worked, yellow, black body stretched across dusty floorboards, or sitting upright in the yard with his ears pricked toward the old horse barn. But at night, when the ranch settled into its cold and watchful silence, Nova returned to the sealed stall, not with panic, with purpose. On the 7th night, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with Elias's old calendar open in front of him and the photograph of Raven beside it. The room was lit by a single lamp. Rain clicked against the windows. His cane leaned against the chair. A bottle of pain medication sat unopened near his elbow. He had not taken any that evening. He wanted his mind clear. The medical reports Diane had used in court lay folded inside his duffel bag in the next room, but Marcus could feel them anyway. They had become invisible witnesses, always present, always ready to speak against him. Words written by strangers had started to live inside his head. Hypervigilance, sleep disruption, combat trauma, potential dissociative response. Marcus stared at the calendar until the handwriting blurred. What if he was building a conspiracy because losing his family hurt too much? What if the sheriff was right and he was digging up things that should be left alone? What if Diane had not lied as much as he wanted to believe? Across the room, Nova lifted his head. The dog had been lying near the back door, but now his ears stood high. His black masked face angled toward the barn. Not yet alarmed, listening. Marcus looked at the clock above the stove. 2:11 a.m. He stood slowly. Pain ran through his damaged leg, sharp at first, then deep and hot. He took the cane, then stopped. No, tonight he needed both hands. He left the cane against the table and picked up the crowbar, hammer, bolt cutters, and a heavy flashlight. His walk across the yard was uneven, almost ugly, but he did not slow. Nova moved beside him without pulling ahead. In the blue-gray darkness, the dog looked like a shadow made of muscle and breath. The barn smelled of wet timber and old hay. Marcus set the flashlight on an overturned feed bucket and aimed it at the fourth stall. The iron door waited beneath a skin of rust, its welded edges dull and swollen where metal had been forced to hold a secret in place. He ran his gloved fingers over the seam. Someone had wanted permanence, not a padlock, not a chain, a weld. Marcus raised the hammer and struck. The sound cracked through the barn and rolled out into the rain. He struck again. With every blow, something inside him answered. The gavel in the courtroom, the snap of a hospital brace around his leg, the click of Diane's attorney placing his medical history on a table like a weapon. The voice of his stepfather, Ray Barlow, telling him men did not question stronger men unless they wanted to be broken. Marcus hit the seam again, and again. His breath came harder, his leg trembled. Sweat gathered beneath his clean blue camouflage sleeves despite the cold. Nova stood to one side, still and focused, eyes on the door rather than Marcus. "Don't look at me like that," Marcus muttered. Nova blinked. Marcus almost laughed. It came out closer to a breath. For the first time since returning to Ravenwood, the dog was not asking him to understand. He was waiting for Marcus to choose. The metal gave just before 3 in the morning. A crack opened along the lower hinge. Marcus wedged the crowbar in, leaned his weight into it, and felt something tear loose with a scream of rust. The door shifted inward an inch. Cold air slipped out. Not normal cold. A trapped underground cold, damp and stale, carrying the smell of earth, old straw, and iron. Nova stepped forward but did not enter. Marcus pushed the door wider. The stall beyond was nearly empty. Old straw lay blackened with age. A wooden feed trough had collapsed along one wall. Cobwebs hung in thick ropes from the beams. On the left side, deep scratches marked the planks in groups of 3. Marcus lifted the flashlight. The scratches were old. Some low, near the height of a dog's forepaws. Some higher, where the animal must have risen against the wall in desperation or insistence. They were not random. They collected near the far corner beneath a row of warped boards. Nova entered then. His paws made no sound on the rotted straw. He crossed the stall directly, nose low, ears forward, and stopped over one loose floor plank. He did not dig. He only looked back at Marcus. Marcus limped toward him and crouched with difficulty. The plank lifted easier than expected. Below it was not open earth, but a narrow wooden hatch fitted into the floor, nearly invisible beneath years of dust and straw. A rusted ring handle lay flat against the surface. Marcus wrapped his fingers around it. For a second he could not pull. His heart was beating too hard. He thought of Elias sitting alone in this barn, knowing someone might come for him. He thought of Raven scratching the wood, trying to make human beings understand. He thought of himself at 15, angry and afraid, believing the wrong man because the wrong man had been louder. Nova touched his shoulder with his nose. A small pressure. Enough. Marcus pulled. The hatch opened with a wet groan. Under the floor was a shallow, hidden compartment, boxed in with treated wood. Inside, wrapped in dark oilcloth, was a military tin case. The case was scratched, dented, and sealed with 2 strips of old tape that had yellowed with age. On the lid, in faded black marker, Elias had written, "If Marcus comes home." Marcus went very still. Not if anyone finds this. Not if the sheriff asks. If Marcus comes home. For a moment, the barn disappeared around him. He was back in a smaller body, rain on his face, Ray's grip biting into his shoulder, Elias calling his name from somewhere behind him. Marcus swallowed hard and lifted the box out. It was heavier than he expected. He placed it on the stall floor, broke the tape, and opened the lid. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, a roll of old cassette tape, several photographs inside a plastic sleeve, a flash drive sealed in a small evidence bag, and a thick folder marked in Elias's handwriting. Marcus did not touch the folder first. He picked up the photographs. The first image showed a younger Grant Whitfield standing under a courthouse awning. At the time, he had not yet become mayor. He wore a deputy sheriff's uniform, clean and fitted, the badge bright against his chest. He was tall enough to seem imposing without effort, with smooth, silver-brown hair combed back from a square forehead, a politician's handsome face, and a smile that looked warm until one noticed how little it reached his eyes. Even frozen in a photograph, Grant had the polished ease of a man who knew how to make lies appear official. Beside him stood Diane, younger, composed, her blonde-brown hair pinned back, her posture straight, a slim folder clutched against her cream-colored coat. She did not look frightened in the picture. She looked involved. Marcus stared at her face longer than he meant to. The woman in the photograph was not the exhausted wife from his memories, not the mother holding their children at school events, not the woman who had once promised she understood his nightmares. This Diane stood close enough to Grant Whitfield that their shoulders nearly touched. The photo had been taken years before Marcus came home wounded, years before she claimed she had only recently become afraid of him. He turned to the next photograph, a courthouse records room. Diane again. Grant in the doorway, a banker's box on the table between them. The label on the box was blurred, but one number had been circled in red ink. Marcus's hand tightened until the plastic sleeve bent. Nova whined softly. That small sound pulled Marcus back from the edge of something dark. He set the photographs down and opened Elias's journal. The writing began neatly, as if Elias had expected law to still matter. Dates, names, account transfers, Grant Whitfield's initials, court filing numbers, denied benefit claims, approved disbursements under names that did not match living addresses. Then, deeper into the journal, the handwriting changed. It became rushed, angled, angrier. Elias had discovered that money from the County Veterans Relief Fund had been moving through false assistance claims. Some payments had gone to people long dead, others to shell accounts connected to local contractors. The money had been meant for wounded veterans, widows, therapy support, mobility repairs, housing emergencies, people who had earned help, people who had waited for help, people who had been told there was no funding left. Marcus read faster, breath tightening. Diane's name appeared first as clerk, then as witness, then as final verification on amended court records. Elias had written one line beneath her name. Diane did not build the machine, but she learned which lever paid. Marcus closed his eyes. Anger would have been easier if it had come cleanly. But what rose in him was tangled with grief, humiliation, and a sickening sense that his life had been arranged around truths everyone else knew first. Then he found the unfinished entry. Diane did not only sign for money. Grant keeps something over her. If I die, start with 217. The next page had been torn out. The tear was rough, not removed carefully by Elias. Taken. Marcus sat back on his heels, feeling the cold from the floor climb into his bones. The rehook came when Nova suddenly turned away from the open box. His body stiffened. He moved to the far wall and pressed his nose against a vertical beam scarred by age. Then he lifted one paw and placed it gently over 3 old claw marks. Not scratching, not digging, matching. Marcus raised the flashlight. Beside those marks, almost hidden beneath dirt, someone had carved a tiny cross into the wood. Under it were 2 letters, R-H, Raven, Hale, or something else. Marcus felt the barns shift around him, not physically, but in meaning. This was not only a hiding place, it had been a witness stand, a place where a man and his dog had tried to leave testimony for anyone brave enough to read wood, rust, in silence. Nova lowered his head. For one brief second, Marcus had the irrational thought that the dog was paying respect. He did not say it aloud, but he did not dismiss it either. At the bottom of the tin case was a sealed envelope with his name on it. Marcus opened it last. Inside was a photograph. He knew it before his mind accepted it. He was 15 in the picture, thinner, pale-faced, standing outside the fourth stall in a rain-dark jacket. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open as if someone had just told him not to speak. Behind him, Elias knelt in the mud with Raven in his arms. The dog's chest was streaked with blood and rainwater. At the edge of the frame stood a man's heavy boot and the bottom of a brown work coat. Ray. Marcus turned the photograph over. Elias had written, "You saw that night. Ray made you call it a nightmare." The barn seemed to tilt. Marcus gripped the edge of the box. A memory broke loose. Rain hammering the roof. Raven crying, not like an animal in pain, but like a warning. Elias saying, "Marcus, look at me. Don't believe him." Ray's hand closing around Marcus's shoulder. Ray's voice near his ear. "Get in the truck. Your uncle's sick, you hear me? Sick men make up stories." Marcus remembered the smell of wet leather, the taste of fear, the humiliation of wanting to obey because obedience made Ray loosen his grip. Then the memory stopped. A wall slammed down inside him where the rest should have been. Marcus breathed through his nose, slow and controlled, the way he had been taught to survive pain. But this pain did not stay in the leg. It moved behind his ribs, behind his eyes. He had spent decades believing he had abandoned Elias because he was angry. Now the photograph suggested something worse and kinder at once. He had been a child who had been moved like a piece on someone else's board. Still, the guilt remained. Nova nudged his hand. Marcus opened his fingers and found that he had crushed the edge of the photograph. "Sorry," he whispered. He did not know whether he was speaking to the dog, to Elias, to Raven, or to the boy in the picture. Only then did Marcus notice something attached beneath the inner lining of the tin case. A flat brass mechanism, no larger than a pocket watch, had been wired to a small spring and striker. It was old, green by time, but not dead. A narrow thread of copper ran from it through the bottom of the case and into a hollow groove beneath the floorboards. Marcus lifted the flashlight closer. It was a wind-up timer, primitive, mechanical, almost childish in its simplicity, but brilliant. Each night when the spring released, the striker tapped metal beneath the floor. Not loud enough for a person inside the house to hear, but enough for a trained dog. Enough for Raven once. Enough for Nova now. Marcus looked at the tiny device with a terrible kind of admiration. Elias had known people might ignore a journal. They might burn a file. They might silence a witness. But a dog trained to hear a signal would come back, again and again, until someone followed. Marcus sat in the stall long after the rain stopped. The folder marked 217 lay open beside him. The photographs, the journal, the flash drive, the torn page, the picture of his younger self. None of it gave him the whole truth. It gave him something more dangerous. A beginning. Nova finally lay down near the open hatch, placing his body between Marcus and the door, guarding him, or guarding what Elias had left behind. Marcus touched the dog's head, his hand resting against the warm fur between Nova's ears. "You heard what I couldn't," he said. Nova's eyes remained fixed on the dark opening beneath the floor. When dawn began to thin the barn shadows, Marcus gathered the contents back into the tin case. He did not know who to trust. He did not know what Diane had done willingly or under pressure. He did not know why Ray had made him forget. But he knew one thing now with a certainty no court filing could erase. Ravenwood had not been empty. For 15 years, it had been waiting for someone wounded enough, lonely enough, and desperate enough to finally listen. By sunrise, Marcus had stopped pretending the tin box was only evidence. It sat on the passenger seat beside him like a living thing, wrapped again in the oilcloth, pressed beneath his right hand whenever the road turned rough. Nova sat in the back of the truck, not because he had been ordered there, but because he had chosen that position. From behind Marcus's shoulder, the Malinois watched the rear window, ears upright, black masked face still and severe. Marcus drove away from Ravenwood with the strange feeling that the ranch was watching him leave. The morning was pale and wet. Low clouds dragged across the hills, and the fields outside Ashford lay silver under a cold drizzle. Marcus had not slept. His leg throbbed from the hours spent in the stall, and the muscles along his back had tightened from carrying the box and the weight of what it meant. He had spent most of the night reading enough of Elias's journal to understand one thing. He could not do this alone. The address he needed was on the second floor of a narrow brick building across from the courthouse annex. Vance Legal Aid and Advocacy. The letters on the glass door were simple, worn at the edges, and almost stubbornly plain. Elena Vance's office looked less like a place built for winning and more like a place built for not giving up. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall. Stacks of case folders leaned on the floor beside a bookcase packed with veterans' benefit manuals, family court guides, and old county records. A coffee pot sat on a side table, burned nearly dry. Elena came out from the back room before the receptionist could speak. She was 43, tall and lean, with dark brown hair tied low at the nape of her neck. Her face was sharp in the way of someone who had learned to listen more than she smiled. But there was warmth in her eyes if one looked long enough. She wore a charcoal gray suit, a pale blue shirt, and flat black leather shoes. Nothing about her looked decorative. Everything looked ready. She saw Marcus's limp first, then Nova, then the military tin case under Marcus's arm. Her expression changed only slightly. "Marcus Hale," she said. He nodded. "You know me?" "I know your case." Her voice stayed even, but not cold. "And I knew your uncle." That stopped him. Elena stepped aside. "Come in." Nova entered last and immediately positioned himself near the office door. Elena noticed, but unlike most people, she did not tense. She only looked at him with quiet respect. "Working dog?" she asked. "Retired. By choice?" Marcus looked at her. Elena nodded once, as if the answer was already clear. "Of course not." In the conference room, Marcus placed the tin case on the table. He did not open it right away. For a moment, his hand remained flat on the lid, covering the faded words Elias had written for him. Elena sat opposite him. She did not rush him. That made it worse somehow. Marcus had grown used to people filling silence with suspicion, instructions, or sympathy. Elena gave him the kind of silence that expected truth to arrive on its own feet. Finally, he opened the box. The photographs came first, then the journal, then the folder marked 217. Elena examined each item without speaking. Her face did not show shock. That unsettled Marcus more than if she had gasped. Her fingers moved carefully, lifting plastic sleeves by the corners, reading dates, names, file numbers. When she reached the photograph of Grant Whitfield and Diane outside the courthouse records room, her jaw tightened. By the time she opened the 217 folder, the color had left her face. She sat back slowly. "Where did you find this?" "Under the fourth stall at Ravenwood." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, not in disbelief, in recognition. "You knew about this," Marcus said. "I knew there was something." She opened her eyes. "I didn't know what shape it had." She stood and walked to the window. Across the street, the courthouse annex rose in pale stone and dark glass, plain and official, the kind of building people entered believing paper made things fair. Elena looked at it like a wound. "7 years ago, I represented a woman named Carolyn Mercer," she said. "Her husband was a Marine veteran, back injury, depression after service. He qualified for county relief funds after their house flooded. The fund denied him, said there was no active record under his claim number." Marcus listened without moving. "Elena," he said carefully, "what happened?" She kept her eyes on the courthouse. 2 months later, I found a payment connected to that same claim number. Different name, different address, same underlying file. By the time I requested the original documents, they were gone." "Diane?" "She was a court clerk then." Elena turned back. "Not the only one with access. But her verification stamp appeared on 3 amended records I was never allowed to examine closely." Marcus felt the words settle over him with a dull, sick weight. "What happened to Caroline?" "She left Ashford." Elena's voice softened. "She said this town had taken enough from her family. There was more there, a private failure Elena still carried. Marcus recognized that kind of burden immediately. People who blame themselves did not always confess it. Sometimes they organized their lives around making sure the same thing never happened twice. Elena returned to the table and tapped the folder marked 217. This proves I wasn't chasing shadows. Then we take it to court. No. The answer came so quickly Marcus stiffened. Elena saw it and raised one hand. Not because it doesn't matter, because it matters too much to mishandle. She pointed to the USB sealed in the small evidence bag. Encrypted. We need it opened by someone who won't run to Whitfield. The cassette tape needs authentication. The journal is powerful, but they'll attack Elias's state of mind. They'll say he was paranoid before his death. Marcus's fingers curled against the table. And me? Elena did not look away. They'll use your PTSD to say you're connecting unrelated fragments because you're under stress. Marcus laughed once, without humor. They already used it to take my kids. They used it to limit your access pending review, Elena said, firm but careful. That matters legally. It doesn't matter when my son asks why I can't drive him home. The room went quiet. Nova lifted his head from the floor. Elena's expression changed then. Not pity, something steadier. Marcus, PTSD is not the problem. The problem is someone turning private medical records into a character assassination. He looked down. The words should have comforted him. Instead, they exposed the question he had been avoiding since the hospital. What if Diane wasn't wrong to be afraid? Elena leaned forward. Were you violent with your children? No. Did you threaten Diane? No. Have you stayed in treatment? Yes. Then don't let people who benefit from your shame define your capacity to love your children. Marcus closed his eyes. For one moment, he could almost believe her. Then he saw his daughter's face in memory, looking at him through a visitation room window, unsure whether she was allowed to run into his arms. Belief vanished. The rehook came quietly, not from a document, but from Nova. The Malinois rose and walked to the conference room wall, where framed photographs of Elena with former clients hung in a modest row. He stopped before one picture near the bottom. A woman stood beside Elena, holding a folded flag case against her chest. A young boy clung to the woman's coat. Nova did not bark. He sat, perfectly, as if recognizing grief before anyone named it. Elena followed his gaze, and the controlled mask on her face slipped. That's Caroline, she said. Marcus looked at the photograph. The boy in the picture could not have been more than 6. His eyes were large and tired, too serious for a child. Elena's voice dropped. Her husband's claim was one of the first I suspected had been moved through a false file. I could never prove it. Nova stayed seated before the photograph, unmoving, a veteran dog honoring a family the system had erased from its own paperwork. Marcus felt something shift in him. This was not only about his children, not only Elias, not only Diane. Someone had been stealing from the wounded and then calling the wounded unreliable when they asked where the money went. Elena saw that he understood. Now you know why we do this carefully, she said. That evening, Marcus returned to Ravenwood with the tin case locked behind the seat and Elena's warning repeating in his mind. Do not act angry. Do not threaten anyone. Do not confront Whitfield alone. Do not hand them the version of you they want. He had barely made it to the porch when headlights turned into the driveway. Nova stepped between Marcus and the steps before the car stopped. A cream-colored sedan idled in the rain. Diane got out. She wore a tailored cream blazer over a white silk blouse, beige trousers, and low nude heels that sank slightly into the wet gravel. Even at Ravenwood, surrounded by mud and broken fencing, she looked composed, almost polished. Her blonde-brown hair was smooth at her shoulders, though the wind kept pulling strands across her face. Her beauty had always been clean and controlled, but tonight something moved beneath it, fear. Marcus had seen Diane angry. He had seen her perform sadness in court with terrifying precision. He had seen her look wounded while saying things that cut. He had never seen her afraid of the place itself. Her eyes went past him to the barn. The fourth stall door stood partly open. Diane's face lost color. Nova growled low. Easy, Marcus said. The dog obeyed but did not move aside. Diane looked at Nova as if she understood exactly why the dog disliked her. Marcus, she said. His name sounded strange in her mouth. Not intimate anymore, not even hostile. Careful. You shouldn't be here, she said. This is my property. You know what I mean. Marcus stepped down from the porch, pain tightening his jaw. Do I? Diane glanced toward the road. Did Grant send you? Her mouth tightened. That was answer enough. Marcus said, What do you know about 217? The number struck her harder than an accusation. For 1 second, all the practiced softness left her face. What remained was the woman from the photograph. Younger in memory, cornered now, still calculating. I don't know what you think you found, she said. You were in the pictures. Her eyes closed briefly. Diane. She opened them again, and this time there was exhaustion there, real exhaustion. You don't understand Grant. Then help me understand. She looked at the house, the barn, Nova, then Marcus's injured leg. Her gaze lingered there, and he hated that it still held something like sorrow. I didn't start it, she said quietly. What did you sign? Her throat moved. One correction, that's what he called it. One court record. One veterans relief file that had to be amended because of a clerical error. She gave a small, bitter smile. That was the first lie. The kind you tell yourself so the next one feels smaller. Marcus said nothing. Diane's voice dropped. After that, he had my signature, my stamp, my access logs. Every mistake became a leash. Did you know about Elias? She looked away. The silence between them changed temperature. Diane, I knew he was asking questions, she whispered. I knew Grant was worried. I didn't know what would happen. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give and still be able to sleep. Marcus stepped closer. You used my medical records against me. Her face hardened, but her eyes shone. You think I wanted to? Yes. The word left him before mercy could soften it. Diane flinched. Then her phone rang. The sound cut through the rain. She looked down at the screen. Marcus saw the name before she turned it away. Grant. Diane did not answer. She silenced the call with trembling fingers. But when she looked up again, the fear had folded itself back behind control. The mask returned. Stop digging, she said. Not for me, for the children. Don't use them. I'm not, her voice sharpened. You think truth comes clean, Marcus? You think it only hurts the guilty? He did not answer. Diane reached into her bag and placed a sealed envelope on the porch step. Then she returned to her car. Nova watched until the taillights disappeared. Marcus opened the envelope inside the house. 2 photographs lay within, his children outside their school. Not close enough to suggest someone had touched them. Not dramatic enough to call police and be believed. Just close enough to tell Marcus that someone knew their routine. On the back of one photo, printed in block letters, was a single question. Do you really want to drag them into this? Marcus sat at the kitchen table for a long time with the photographs in front of him. Nova rested his chin on Marcus's knee. For the first time since finding the box, Marcus understood the cruelest part of the trap. If he stayed silent, he protected his children from immediate fear and left them inside a lie. If he fought, he might give them the truth and wound them with it. He did not know which choice belonged to a good father. Near midnight, Elena called. I found someone who may know how to open the USB, she said. Who? Marlene Pike, retired court clerk. She worked with Diane. Can we trust her? No, Elena said, but I think she's afraid of the right people. Marlene lived in a narrow house behind the old Methodist church, where the streetlights flickered and the yards were bordered by chain-link fences. Elena met Marcus at the curb. She had changed into a dark wool coat over the same charcoal suit, her hair still tied back, her face more tired than before. Marlene Pike opened the door only as far as the security chain allowed. She was 65, thin and stooped, with gray hair pulled into a low bun and skin pale from a life spent indoors among paper, stamps, and fluorescent lights. She wore a light brown cardigan over a dark gray skirt, a beige scarf wrapped around her neck, and soft house shoes. Her hands trembled around the edge of the door. Her eyes moved constantly, not because she was dishonest, but because fear had become a habit of survival. "Elena," she whispered, "you shouldn't have come here." "You remember file 217, Elena said. Marlene's eyes flicked to Marcus. "This is Marcus Hale," Elena said. "I know who he is." Marcus stepped into the weak porch light. He said nothing. Marlene looked at him for several seconds, and something like shame crossed her face. "You have Elias's eyes," she said. Marcus felt the words hit harder than expected. Elena asked, "Can you open the USB?" "No," Marlene swallowed. "But I know who made the duplicate index." "Who?" Marlene's fingers tightened around the chain. "Diane wasn't the first to sign false relief records," she said. "But she was the one who made Elias understand they weren't clerical errors. She gave him the path to Grant without meaning to." "Do you have proof?" Elena asked. Marlene looked down, then pushed a folded slip of paper through the gap in the door. Elena took it. On the paper was a code written in faded blue ink, 217-B. Marcus stared at it. "What is that?" Marlene's breathing quickened. "An annex file," she whispered. "Not in the courthouse system anymore. Not under that number." "Where is it?" Elena asked. Marlene's lips parted. For a second, she seemed ready to answer. Then a car passed slowly at the end of the street. Marlene recoiled as if struck. No, I can't." She began to close the door. Marcus stepped forward. "Mrs. Pike, please." That stopped her. Not because of force, because of the word please. Marlene looked at him through the narrowing gap, and her eyes filled with old regret. "If you want to know why Elias died," she said, voice shaking, "ask who Ray Barlow welded that stall for." "Marlene," Elena said, but the door closed. The lock turned. Marcus stood in the porch light with rain beginning to fall again, holding the name of his stepfather inside him like a fresh wound. Behind him, Nova looked back toward the street, ears high, silent and watchful. Somewhere in the darkness, a car engine faded away. Marcus did not go back to sleep after Marlene Pike closed her door. By the time he returned to Ravenwood, dawn had not yet broken, but the sky had begun to pale behind the tree line. Rain had stopped sometime before morning, leaving the ground soft and dark. The old ranch looked soaked through, as if every board and fence post had absorbed more secrets than weather. Nova jumped down from the truck and stood beside Marcus without command. The dog did not run toward the barn this time. He watched Marcus. That somehow hurt more. Marcus unlocked the house and went straight to Elias's office. The room seemed different now, not because anything had moved, but because Marcus had. Before, the desk, cabinets, and boxes had belonged to a dead uncle. Now they looked like pieces of a map someone had tried to scatter. He searched with slow discipline, not frantic, not dramatic. That was what scared him. The calmer he became, the more he understood how much of his childhood had been built by other people's hands. In the second drawer of a filing cabinet, beneath old feed invoices and county tax notices, he found a folder labeled Ravenwood Maintenance. Most of it was ordinary: roof patching, fence repair, plumbing work. Then Marcus found a carbon copy receipt dated 15 years earlier, 3 days after Elias's death. Work completed, reinforcement and sealing of fourth stall door. Contractor, Ray Barlow. Paid by Whitfield Development Services. Marcus stared at the line until his eyes burned. Whitfield Development Services had been one of the local contractors named in Elias's journal, a company that had received money through county veteran support projects. Mobility ramps, home repairs, emergency housing modifications. Work meant to help wounded men and widows keep living with dignity. Ray had taken money from that circle. Ray had not only dragged Marcus away from the barn that night, he had come back after Elias died and sealed the door. Marcus sat in Elias's chair, the receipt trembling slightly between his fingers. He could hear Ray's voice again, low and certain. Your uncle's sick. Sick men make up stories. You want to be weak like him? Marcus closed his eyes. He had spent 40 years believing his shame belonged to him. Now he understood that shame could be planted, watered, trained to grow around memory until a boy no longer knew which thoughts were his own. Nova came into the office and placed his head against Marcus's thigh. Not demanding, anchoring. Marcus rested a hand between the dog's ears. I lived with him, he whispered. I lived under his roof. Nova stayed still. There was no answer that could make that smaller. At noon, Elena called. Her voice was controlled, but Marcus heard the tightness beneath it. An anonymous complaint was filed this morning. Against me? Against Nova. Marcus's hand tightened around the phone. Elena continued. The complaint claims you're living alone on deteriorating property with a retired working dog previously removed for aggressive instability. It requests immediate animal control review and a custody risk reassessment. Marcus looked through the office doorway. Nova was lying in the hall, but his ears had lifted at the change in Marcus's breathing. They're going after him, Marcus said. Yes, Elena replied, because they know what he means to you. Within an hour, 2 vehicles pulled into Ravenwood. The first was Sheriff Cole Ramsey's Brown County SUV. The second was a white animal control van with the county seal printed on the side. Cole stepped out slowly, adjusting his hat against the cold. His heavy frame filled the brown sheriff's jacket, and his pale eyes moved across the property with practiced disapproval. He carried the authority of a man who had spent years deciding which rules mattered and which people did not. From the van emerged a woman in her early 30s with dark skin, a compact build, and black hair tucked under a navy knit cap. Her name tag read L. Briggs. She wore a county animal services jacket, rubber boots, and thick gloves. Her face was tired, but not unkind. The face of someone used to being sent into messy situations and blamed by everyone present. Behind them came Ruth Callahan in her old pickup, as if she had driven too fast and regretted nothing. Ruth got out before Cole reached the porch. Her moss-green veterinary coat hung open over her gray turtleneck, and her silver hair was windblown. She carried a medical bag in one hand and anger in her posture. Sheriff, she said, if you plan to evaluate a working dog without a veterinarian present, you are about to make a fool of yourself officially. Cole's jaw flexed. Dr. Callahan, this is a county matter. Good, then let's do it correctly. Marcus stood on the porch in his blue camouflage uniform, one hand on the railing, keeping his weight off the worst of his leg. Nova sat at his left side, calm but alert, leather collar visible against his yellow-black coat. Officer Briggs looked at Nova carefully. Is he under command? Marcus said, always. Cole glanced at the dog. That's what they all say before something goes wrong. Ruth stepped forward. Something already went wrong, Cole. You just keep blaming the dog for noticing. Briggs looked between them, uncomfortable. Marcus gave Nova a quiet command. The Malinois lowered himself to the porch boards, chin down, eyes on Marcus. Not submissive, controlled. Briggs watched. He's responsive, she said. Cole's mouth tightened. His record says he was removed after an incident. His record says what someone wrote, Ruth said. Dogs do not write their own defense. She knelt near Nova, slow and respectful, and checked his pupils, breathing, body posture, and reaction to touch. Nova allowed it, though his ears tracked Cole the entire time. Ruth stood. No unprovoked aggression, no loss of control. Elevated vigilance consistent with training and recent environmental stress. He is not a public danger. Cole said, a dog previously labeled unstable is still a risk. Ruth looked at him with open contempt now. No, a dog reacting correctly to what men refuse to see is what makes you nervous. The words struck the yard harder than shouting would have. Marcus did not speak. He could not trust his voice. For the first time since returning to Ashford, someone had defended Nova in daylight, in front of a badge, without apology. Officer Briggs wrote in her clipboard. I won't recommend removal, she said. Cole turned toward her. That's your final assessment? Yes, Sheriff. Briggs's tone stayed respectful, But something in her eyes had changed. She had seen enough animals to know fear from discipline, and Nova was disciplined. Cole looked back at Marcus. "This isn't over." Marcus answered quietly, "It never was." The vehicles left just after mid-afternoon. Ruth remained long enough to check Nova again and hand Marcus a small card with her emergency number written on the back. "You keep him inside tonight," she said. "He doesn't like being away from the barn." Ruth's gaze softened. "Maybe neither of you has to stand guard alone anymore." That night, Marcus sat in the living room beside a fireplace that produced more smoke than warmth. The tin box was hidden beneath loose floorboards in the downstairs bedroom, not in the barn anymore. The receipt with Ray's name lay on the table beside the photographs of his children. Nova stood at the back door, watching the dark. Marcus tried to read Elias's journal again, but could not hold the words steady. He had lost his house. He had lost the right to be with his children freely. He had lost the clean version of his marriage. Now they had tried to take Nova. The realization came slowly and with a shame he did not expect. He needed the dog. Not as a handler needs a working animal. Not as a lonely man needs company. He needed Nova because Nova did not look at him through a diagnosis. The dog had seen Marcus wake shaking. He had seen him limp, fail, curse under his breath, sit in the dark with his face in his hands. Nova had seen all of it and never once stepped away as if Marcus had become less worthy of staying beside. Near midnight, Marcus finally whispered, "I don't know if I can do this." Nova turned from the door. For a moment, he simply looked at Marcus. Then, for the first time since they had arrived at Ravenwood, the Malinois walked past the threshold of the living room and into the downstairs bedroom. He circled once beside the bed, lowered himself to the rug, and rested his head on his paws. No command, no guarding the door, no waiting by the barn. Just staying. Marcus stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. The re-hook was quiet enough to break him. On the night when every powerful person in Ashford wanted Nova labeled dangerous, the dog chose not to guard the secret outside. He chose to guard the wounded man inside. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and put one hand over his eyes. He did not sob. Men like Marcus often learn too early how to suffer silently, but his shoulders shook once. Nova lifted his head and pressed his muzzle against Marcus's knee. That was all. And somehow, for a few minutes, Ravenwood felt less like a ruin and more like a place that might remember how to hold a person without hurting him. The peace did not last. 2 nights later, Marcus woke before Nova moved. Not to sound, to smell. Something chemical lay beneath the old house scent of wood, dust, and cold ash. Nova was already on his feet. His body was rigid, ears high, lips parted just enough to draw air across his teeth. He was not looking at the barn. He was looking toward the kitchen door. Marcus reached for the flashlight and his cane. Nova growled once, low, warning. Then he moved. The back door stood open by an inch. Marcus had locked it. Cold air slid across the floor. Outside, the yard was black except for the distant shape of the barn. A figure moved near the storage shed attached to the forestall. Not clearly, just a darker motion inside darkness. Nova surged forward. "Nova, wait!" The dog stopped, but his entire body shook with restraint. Then Marcus saw the flame, a thin line of orange crawling along the base of the storage shed. Not a wildfire, not an accident, a deliberate, controlled beginning. Whoever had come did not need to destroy all of Ravenwood, only the places that might still hold what Elias left behind. Marcus stepped off the porch, pain lancing up his leg. The figure turned. For half a second, the flashlight caught him. A lean man in a black leather jacket, dark jeans, and boots. His face narrow and hollow-cheeked, hair cut close to his skull. He moved like a former cop or soldier, not panicked, just efficient. Marcus did not know his name yet, but he would remember the eyes, small, flat, impractical. The man raised something in his hand. Nova lunged. A soft pneumatic hiss cut the air. Nova stumbled mid-stride, not falling, not yet. Marcus's blood went cold. "Nova!" The same sharp chemical smell hit him harder now. Animal sedative. The smell from Nova's final service incident, the smell no one had believed mattered. Nova shook his head violently and kept moving. The man cursed and ran toward the trees. Marcus could not chase him. His leg would not allow it. Worse, smoke was thickening near the barn, curling beneath the roofline and pushing toward the old storage room where Marcus had left tools, documents he had not yet sorted, and several boards pulled from the forestall. He moved toward the shed. Too slow. Always too slow now. The heat grew fast. Dry straw hidden behind old boards caught, and smoke poured outward in a dark roll. Marcus tried to drag a hose from the sidewall, but the ground beneath his bad legs shifted. Rotten flooring near the shed entrance gave way under his weight. He went down hard. Pain exploded white through his thigh. For a few seconds he could not breathe. Smoke filled his mouth. The world became heat, coughing, and the humiliating helplessness of a body that would not obey. Then Nova was there. The dog was swaying. His legs did not move right. His eyes looked unfocused, but his teeth found Marcus's blue camouflage sleeve and clamped down. Not enough to wound, enough to pull. "Go," Marcus rasped. "Nova, go!" Nova pulled again. Marcus tried to push himself up, failed, then hooked one arm around a broken support beam. The dog dragged backward, paws scraping mud, muscles trembling under the sedative's weight. Inch by inch, Marcus moved. Smoke rolled over them. Nova released the sleeve, grabbed the back of Marcus's collar, and pulled again with everything left in his body. By the time Marcus reached open ground, sirens had begun somewhere far down the road. Maybe a neighbor had seen smoke. Maybe Ruth, restless and suspicious, had called someone after hearing engines near the ranch. Marcus did not know. He collapsed in the wet grass, coughing so hard his chest burned. Nova staggered 2 steps and fell beside him. Marcus rolled toward the dog. The tin box was not in the barn, thank God, but in Marcus's clenched hand was the Ray Barlow receipt he had taken from the table without remembering. It was crumpled, damp with sweat, but intact. Nova's breathing was shallow. Marcus pulled the dog against him. "No," he whispered. "No, no, stay with me." Nova blinked slowly. Marcus pressed his forehead to the dog's neck. "Not this time," he said, voice breaking. "I'm not leaving anyone behind this time." He was not only speaking to Nova. He was speaking to Elias, to Raven, to the boy who had been pulled away in the rain and taught to call terror imagination. Red light washed over the yard as the first emergency vehicle arrived. Ruth reached them before anyone else, dropping to her knees beside Nova with her medical bag already open. "Move your hand, Marcus. Let me see him." "He was drugged." "I know." Ruth's voice was tight but steady. "I can smell it." Elena arrived not long after, coat thrown over sleep clothes, her face pale in the flashing lights. Officer Briggs came with the second county vehicle, and even in the confusion, she saw the puncture mark near Nova's shoulder and the burned edge of the storage shed. Ruth worked fast. Nova breathed. Weakly, but he breathed. Near the shed door, Officer Briggs found a torn strip of black leather caught on a nail, and beneath it, a small tarnished badge backing. Not a full badge, just the rear clasp from an old county sheriff's office insignia. Elena picked it up with a handkerchief. "This doesn't belong to a random trespasser," she said. By dawn, the fire was out. Part of the storage shed was gone. The edge of the fourth stall was scorched, but the hidden compartment had already been emptied. The tin box remained safe beneath Marcus's bedroom floor. Ruth confirmed the sedative used on Nova was the same class as the chemical Marcus had described from the incident that ended Nova's service record. Not proof yet, but a bridge. Elena took the damaged USB to a contact she trusted outside Ashford. By noon, she called Marcus from her car. "We recovered 12 seconds. Marcus stood beside Nova's blanket near the fireplace. The dog slept, exhausted but alive. Elena's voice came through the phone, low and shaken. "It's Elias on video. The file cuts off, but he says one thing clearly." Marcus closed his eyes. Elena played the audio, static, cracked. Then Elias's voice emerged, thin with fear but unmistakable. If I die, don't start with Grant. Start with Ray and 217-B. The recording ended. Marcus opened his eyes and looked toward the hallway that led to Elias's old office. For the first time, Ray Barlow was no longer only the man who had haunted Marcus's childhood. He was the door. And somewhere behind him, the rest of the truth was still waiting. The hearing began as a custody review. That was what the papers called it. A review of temporary restrictions. A review of Marcus Hale's psychological stability. A review of whether a father who carried combat trauma, a permanent limp, and a retired working dog with a damaged file could be trusted around his own children without supervision. But by the time Marcus stepped into the Ashford courthouse that morning, he understood something Elena had tried to warn him about. This was not only about custody, it was about who would be allowed to define him. The courthouse smelled of polished wood, old paper, and rain-damp coats. People spoke in low voices near the walls, pretending not to stare. Marcus walked through them in his long-sleeved blue camouflage uniform, clean and fitted, his posture straight despite the pain in his leg. His face was clean-shaven, his silvering undercut neat, his jaw controlled. Every part of him looked disciplined. Only his eyes betrayed the exhaustion. Nova walked at his left side in a steady heel, yellow-black coat brushed clean, black mask sharp against his face, dark brown leather collar visible beneath his ears. The Malinois did not pull. He did not scan wildly. He moved like a dog who understood that this room was another kind of battlefield, one where stillness mattered more than teeth. Elena Vance met them outside the courtroom. She wore her charcoal gray suit, pale blue shirt, and flat black shoes, her dark brown hair tied low as always. There were shadows beneath her eyes, but her voice was calm. "Whatever they say," she told Marcus, "do not let them make you perform anger for them." Marcus gave a faint nod. "I know." "No," Elena said gently. "You know it as a soldier. Today you have to know it as a father." That landed deeper. Across the hall, Diane stood beside her attorney. She wore a cream blazer over a white silk blouse, beige trousers, and low nude heels. Her blonde-brown hair was smooth against her shoulders, her face composed in that careful way Marcus had once mistaken for strength. She looked like a woman prepared to be believed. Her attorney, Richard Vale, was a narrow man in his early 50s, with silver-rimmed glasses, a soft voice, and a habit of folding his hands as if every cruelty he spoke were only procedure. He wore a dark blue suit, a pale tie, and an expression of professional concern so polished it bordered on performance. Near the back of the hallway stood Grant Whitfield. The mayor did not approach. He did not need to. Grant wore a navy suit, white shirt, and deep burgundy tie. His silver-brown hair was combed back with exact care, and his politician's face held a mild, almost sympathetic smile. He looked like a man attending out of civic duty, only his eyes were wrong, cold, still, and watchful. When his gaze touched Marcus, it did not stay long. It moved to Nova, then to Elena's briefcase, then away. The judge entered shortly after 9. Judge Helen Rourke was in her early 60s, a tall woman with dark skin, close-cropped gray hair, and a face that had learned patience without softness. Her black robe hung plain and severe over her narrow shoulders. She had the steady eyes of someone who disliked drama but knew people often hid truth inside it. "Let's proceed," she said. At first, the hearing stayed exactly where Diane wanted it. Richard Vale rose and spoke of concern, of children's safety, of a mother forced into impossible decisions. He did not call Marcus violent outright. He was too careful for that. Instead, he read from medical summaries and court-submitted reports, letting the phrases do the damage. Night terrors, hyperarousal, combat trauma, startle response, emotional withdrawal. He brought up the night Marcus had woken from a nightmare and briefly grabbed Diane's wrist. Marcus sat still. His hands rested on his knees, fingers open, but inside him, something had begun to collapse inward. Vale did not describe the bathroom floor afterward. He did not mention Marcus shaking alone with the door closed because he had terrified himself. He did not mention Diane telling him, "It's okay, you're home," while keeping the memory for later use. He described only the part that made Marcus sound like danger. Diane sat with her eyes lowered, not crying, almost crying. It was worse. Marcus looked toward the small visitation report attached to the file. His children's names were on it, their school, their ages, the supervised room where he had been allowed to see them, the sentence noting that his daughter initially hesitated before physical contact. His chest tightened. Maybe this was what love required. Maybe a father who had become a source of hesitation should learn to stand back. Maybe fighting to return was selfish. Under the table, Nova shifted. Not much. Just enough that Marcus felt the dog's shoulder brush his boot. Marcus looked down. Nova lay beside Elena's chair, head low, body relaxed, eyes fixed on Marcus. No growl, no tension, no fear. In a room where people were describing Marcus as a risk, the dog most trained to detect danger remained calm in his presence. It did not prove anything legally yet, but to Marcus, it felt like a hand held out in the dark. Elena stood. She began not with the fire, not with the hidden box, not with Grant Whitfield. She began with Marcus. "Mr. Hale has PTSD," she said plainly. "He has never denied it. He has sought treatment. He has complied with court orders. He has attended evaluations. He has not been charged with violence against his children. He has not threatened his former spouse. What concerns us today is not the existence of trauma, but the misuse of trauma as a weapon." Vale objected. Judge Rourke overruled him. Elena called Dr. Ruth Callahan first. Ruth entered in her moss-green veterinary coat over a gray turtleneck, brown work pants, and worn boots. In the courtroom, she looked out of place and entirely unimpressed by that fact. Her short silver hair was combed back, her green eyes sharp behind reading glasses. She took the oath with a steady voice. Elena asked about Nova's evaluation. Ruth explained working dog behavior in simple language. Nova's stillness, his response to commands, his ability to distinguish stimulus from threat. She described the anonymous complaint, the county visit, and her conclusion that Nova showed no signs of unprovoked aggression. Then Elena asked about the sedative used during the Ravenwood fire. Ruth's mouth tightened. The puncture site and symptoms were consistent with a DART-administered animal sedative, she said. The dosage appears to have been incomplete or interrupted, which is likely why the dog remained mobile for a short time. Vale stood. "Doctor." "Callahan, are you suggesting this court rely on the behavior of a dog to establish a conspiracy?" Ruth looked at him over her glasses. "I'm suggesting the dog has been more consistent than several humans involved." A sound moved through the room before Judge Rourke silenced it. The re-hook came when Elena played the short, authenticated audio recovered from Elias's old tape. Not the video yet, only the background sound beneath his voice. 3 scratches, a pause. 3 scratches. Nova lifted his head. Everyone saw it. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply raised his ears and turned toward the speaker with heartbreaking precision, as if the sound had reached him from 15 years away. Ruth's face changed. "That," she said quietly, "is an alert pattern." Elena asked, "Used by Raven, Sheriff Elias Hale's working dog?" "Yes." "And Nova had no way to be trained by Raven?" "No. Raven was gone long before Nova came into Mr. Hale's life." So if Nova repeated similar behavior at the 4th stall, the reasonable explanation is not inherited memory, but that both dogs independently responded to a stimulus or evidence hidden in the same location? "Yes," Ruth said. "Dogs don't need myths. They need scent, sound, and truth left where men forgot to clean properly." Marcus heard a few people breathe differently. For the first time that morning, the room had shifted away from him as the problem. Elena moved carefully after that. She introduced photographs recovered from Elias's box. Diane and Grant outside the records room, Grant still in deputy uniform, Diane holding court files. She introduced the folder marked 217, showing false disbursements from the Veterans Relief Fund to names with no living claimants. She introduced the receipt showing Ray Barlow had been paid by Whitfield Development Services to seal the fourth stall days after Elias's death. Diane's face remained composed until Ray's name was read aloud. Then her fingers tightened around each other. Grant Whitfield sat in the back row, still mild, still distant. When called as a witness, he moved to the stand with practiced humility. His voice was warm enough for church halls and charity dinners. He expressed sadness over Elias's decline before his death. He praised veterans. He said small-town records were sometimes messy. He said grief made people see patterns. Then he looked at Marcus. "Mr. Hale has suffered greatly," Grant said. "No one disputes that, but suffering can distort perception." There it was, clean, civil, poisonous. Marcus felt the room look at him again. Elena did not rise immediately. She let the sentence sit. Then she called Wes Calder. The side door opened. The man who entered wore a county-issued detention jacket over a plain gray shirt. Wes Calder was 45, lean and hard, with close-cut dark hair, hollow cheeks, and small eyes that avoided everyone except the exits. Marcus recognized the movement before the face. Efficient, flat, trained enough to be dangerous, not principled enough to be loyal for free. Wes did not look at Grant. That told Marcus something. Elena approached slowly. "Mr. Calder, were you employed by Mayor Whitfield?" "Security work," Wes said. "Officially?" "No." "Were you at Ravenwood Ranch the night of the fire?" Wes's jaw moved once. "Yes." The courtroom went silent. Vale objected. Grant's attorney, a broad man named Leonard Pike, with a red face and expensive cufflinks, rose sharply from the back row, but Judge Rourke ordered Wes to answer. Wes spoke in pieces. He did not confess like a man seeking forgiveness. He spoke like a man calculating how much truth would keep him from taking the whole fall. He admitted he had watched Ravenwood. He admitted he had delivered photographs meant to scare Marcus. He admitted the shed fire was meant to destroy old materials connected to the fourth stall, not to hurt anybody, though his eyes slid away when he said it. He admitted the sedative dart had been meant for Nova. "Why the dog?" Elena asked. Wes looked toward Grant for half a second. Grant did not move. Wes understood then. Whatever protection he had expected was gone. "Because the dog kept finding things," he said. Marcus closed his eyes. Nova's breathing remained steady beside Elena's chair. During the recess, Marcus stepped into the hallway because the room had become too small for the air inside his lungs. Diane followed him. For a moment, neither spoke. Without the courtroom around her, Diane looked less polished. The cream blazer remained perfect, but her face had lost its careful softness. Her eyes were red at the edges. "I didn't know Wes would go that far," she said. Marcus turned to her. "That's what you want me to hear?" "No," her voice cracked. "I don't know what I want you to hear." "Try the truth." She flinched. Then she glanced down the hallway, where Grant stood speaking with his attorney, not looking at her. That seemed to finish something inside her. Diane reached into her purse and pulled out a folded slip of paper. "Give this to Elena," she whispered. "What is it?" "The old access key, for the USB." Marcus did not take it at first. "Why now?" Diane's mouth trembled. "Because Grant will bury me with you if it saves him." She swallowed. "And because I don't want my children growing up inside his lie." Marcus took the paper. "And yours?" Diane looked at him. For a second, he saw the woman he married. Not innocent, not safe, but afraid and human and too late. She did not answer. Back in court, Elena used the access key. The recovered video did not play smoothly. It cracked with static. The image flickered. Elias Hale appeared older than Marcus remembered, seated close to the camera in what looked like his office. His face was drawn, his hair disheveled, but his eyes were clear. "Elena," the recording began, "or Marcus, if God is kinder than this county has been." Marcus stopped breathing. Elias described the false Veterans Relief files. He named 217 and 217-B as linked records. He stated that Grant Whitfield had redirected funds through contractors and amended court documents. He said Diane had signed several verifications, though he believed she had not understood the full machinery at first. He named Ray Barlow as the man paid to seal the fourth stall after a copy of the evidence had been hidden there. Then Elias leaned closer to the camera. The static worsened. "Marcus," he said, voice softer now, "if you ever see this, I don't need you to forgive me for not getting you out sooner. And I don't need you to ask forgiveness for being scared of Ray. You were a boy, hear me? You were a child." Marcus bowed his head. The courtroom blurred. All his life he had carried that night like proof of cowardice. He had believed a better nephew, a braver boy would have stayed, would have understood, would have saved Elias. But Elias, facing death, had not blamed him. He had freed him. The recording ended there. No one spoke. Even Judge Rourke remained still for a moment before calling for order in a voice quieter than before. Marcus did not look at Grant. He did not look at Diane. He looked at Nova. The dog's eyes were on him, calm and unwavering, as if he had known all along that Marcus was not the broken thing the world kept naming. When the judge recessed to review the newly admitted evidence, Marcus sat alone on the bench outside the courtroom. Diane stood at the far end of the hall, arms wrapped around herself. Grant's polished smile was gone. Elena sat beside Marcus, but said nothing. For once, no one asked him to choose quickly. Justice for Elias now had a shape, but so did mercy's cost. Because Diane had lied, and Diane had harmed him, and Diane had helped men bury the truth. Yet his children still called her mom. And Marcus knew the next choice would not be about proving what happened. It would be about deciding what kind of father he wanted to become after the truth had finally learned to speak. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is not proving who hurt us. It is learning how to live after the truth has finally come out. Marcus could not change what was stolen from him. He could not bring back the years or undo the silence around Elias. But with Nova beside him, he learned that peace does not always arrive as a victory. Sometimes it comes quietly, through one honest step, one forgiven memory, and one light left on for someone coming home. In our own lives, we may not have a Ravenwood ranch or a loyal canine leading us to buried evidence, but many of us carry old wounds, unfinished words, or memories we were never able to explain. May this story remind you that being hurt does not mean you are broken, and being delayed does not mean you are forgotten. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what part stayed with you. And if you want more stories about loyalty, healing, and second chances, please subscribe and join us for the next one. May peace find you gently wherever you are tonight.